I now call General Committee meeting to order for February the 9th, 2023. Welcome to tonight's General Committee meeting. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. For tonight's General Committee meeting, members of General Committee will be continuing to discuss Staff Report EMT 001-23 concerning the 2023 business plan and budget, capital budget requests, bylaws updates and forecasts, and council and staff authorization requests. Consideration of the service partners budget request has been deferred to March 8th General Committee meeting. As there are no items on the consent agenda, public meetings, presentations, deferred business, or reports of advisory or special committees or reference committees, we'll go straight into staff reports. Could I have somebody hold the budget staff report EMT 001-23? Just
hold, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. We'll go straight into that report. So Councillor Hamilton, could you begin by putting the report on the floor?
I put it on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. We will continue where we left off last night, going through budget amendments for the capital budget this evening. And we have a list, a smaller list than last night, but we have a list of amendments. So I'm going to start with Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. My first amendment in relation to licensing fees in regards to limousine services. To add the following paragraph under fees, that paragraph 19 be amended to add the following. That staff prepare an amendment to the business licensing bylaw transportation 2006-265 as amended, and the fees bylaw to align the limousine industry with the same provisions related to the taxi cab industry in order to have a limousine company responsible for the drivers. And I can speak to that.
Go ahead, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. In reviewing the licensing fees and the increased fees that are being proposed, it was brought to my attention that it seems like there's some inadequacies in regards to what limousine companies are being charged in relation to taxi companies. And the reason taxi companies went down a few years back was 2 councils ago reviewed. That was when all these Ubers and Lyft came to town, and it really created incomparables between the 2 levels of industry, although they were basically providing the same level of service. And as a result of that, the fees associated with taxi companies were significantly lowered. In exploring this, I reached out to staff in legislative services to find out how many taxi companies we had registered currently, because I wanted to see what the impact was. And I was floored to find out we have no taxi companies registered in the city currently. Or limo, yes. I apologize. I didn't realize it said taxi. We have no limo companies registered currently, which that then caused me to reach out to a limo company to find out, how are you operating without a license? They found a way to get around it because of our fee schedule being out of aligned with other areas. So what they were able to do is then get licensed through the Ministry of Transportation, which then supersedes our bylaw at a much lower cost. So for a small limo company that would have, let's say, 2 limos and 2 drivers, they would be paying 4 times what a taxi company would be. And when you look at the line item for a taxi company, they have one fee of $860 for up to 10 vehicles. Whereas a limo company right now would have to pay $426 for the limo, another $426 for each driver, and another $426 for the company. So they're paying more for 2 vehicles than another company would be for 10. So that's why I'm asking that parity be brought in with the limo company and limo companies. And then hopefully what that will do is when their renewals come up with the MTO licensing, that they'll then come back here and start paying their fees to the city. So right now, we have no income coming in from this. As a result of this amendment, hopefully it'll start bringing some funds in, however small, because I'm only aware of a handful of limo companies that do operate out of the city. But right now, none of them are licensed with us.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Are there any other questions or concerns with regards to this item? Seeing, Councillor Kungle.
I'm not opposed to it at all, but because I'm not too familiar with this fee in context and it was in as a proposed piece from staff, I'll just redirect to staff to see if there was any other context about the history of this or any impact. I like where Councillor Harvey is going with the amendment.
Ms. McAlpine.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall, through you to Councillor Kungle. So as Councillor Harvey indicated, there was a pilot project undertaken a few years ago with respect to the taxi driver for hire and designated driver sectors, so commonly referred to as Uber. As one of the companies that is operating in the city of Barrie, as well as the Canada Drives type companies, and the impact that was having on the industry. The city undertook a review as part of council direction after the pilot. We moved the responsibility for the driver licensing to the company itself. And rather than individual drivers coming into the city for licensing and us having to go through their criminal records checks, etc. The limousine sector wasn't addressed at the time because they really weren't seen as the competition for the taxi industry or vice versa with the driver for hire industry. Traditionally, we have not had limousine companies within the city of Barrie. And the reason that they're not required to be licensed in the city of Barrie is because they don't have a physical business operating address in Barrie. Under our bylaws, if you don't actually have a physical company address in Barrie, you're not required to have a license. You can drop off people, drive through the municipality, but if your place of operations is outside of the city, then a limousine company would not be required to have a license within Barrie, whether or not they were licensed by the ministry. So that's some additional context on that. But currently, as Councillor Harvey indicated, we don't have any limousine companies licensed in the city, and generally we rarely have had them in the past.
And in follow up, sorry, forgive me, does this approving this amendment then impact our need to change our bylaw specific to limo companies?
Mayor Nuttall, through you to Councillor Kungle. Yes, what under the current licensing bylaw, limousine drivers are required to be individually licensed as well as the company and their vehicles. If we want parity, as Councillor Harvey has indicated, we would need to make the same provisions as exist for taxi companies, driver for hire, and designated driver companies.
So perhaps as a friend, well, I guess last point of clarification, is that direction needed to be incorporated into the motion at that time to capture the needed changes to the bylaw if this change happens?
Mayor Nuttall, through you to Councillor Kungle, the direction that's been provided in the amendment would give us the authorization to address that.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Harvey had worked with staff on that.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding the amendment on the floor to the budget? Seeing none, we will call a vote. Those in favor? It carries unanimously. Councillor Hamilton, do you have some motions for us?
Yep, thank you. The first motion here is to do with traffic calming, to add the following paragraph under paragraph 11, that a new capital project be created for traffic calming measures with one-time funding of $75,500 per ward to be funded from the tax capital reserve. And I can speak to that.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. You have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Nettle. I think most of us can attest to the number of concerns that we receive with respect to safety and speeding within our neighborhoods. I know each ward has been allocated a certain number of traffic calming devices, but as we deal with growth and density increases, this fund would give us a little bit more wiggle room to purchase additional traffic calming measures, whether it be an additional speed board or two, I think you could purchase within this budget, speed bump. I know Councilor Morales purchased planters before to test that for reducing speeding as well. So again, it would allow each of us to prioritize within our wards additional speed calming measures that we could use to ensure that we're taking complaints and finding effective solutions for them.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Are there any other questions or comments regarding the amendment on the floor? Councillor Harris.
Thank you.
Always looking out.
You're a good man. Just a quick question, just because it's on the table. It'll be very, very quick. Maybe through you to, I'm not sure if it's Ms. Banfield, maybe. 7,500 and Councillor Hamilton noted that it can buy some traffic calming measures, just as far as kind of managing expectations. The permanent speed cushions were very popular. They were piloted last term, and I know from my experience, very well received. What's the ballpark on those? So that's probably the one that people will be asking me about first and foremost. So thank you.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harris, the $7,500 proposed could likely get one additional set. You know how we have the brakes in them, so you'd be able to get a set most likely.
I'll get a set. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Harris, Councillor Kungl, and then Councillor Morales.
Just briefly, it's nice to see this going forward. It is a high demand area. I know staff actually brought this forward as pretty progressive, and there was some great compliments from residents for those of us that received about 2 different permanent speed cushions. And I think it's good because it creates a protective, I think, measure for us to respond to resident demand without us actually pulling on what we approved last night, which was that beautification wellness piece, and keeping that intention there to not really be managing traffic speed through that, but really doing different aspects around improving the ward in different areas outside of traffic control.
Thank you, Councillor Kungl. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nettle. I'm glad Councillor Kungl went before me because one of the ways to join those two together are planters. They're beautiful and they slow traffic down. So we didn't plan that. So I guess question to Ms. Banfield. I presume the answer is yes, but I want confirmation tonight. The language here is ambiguous enough on purpose that would allow flexibility, not just for speed bumps or radar boards, but traffic calming planters, correct?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales, correct.
Amazing. I'll be supportive of the motion, Mayor Nuttall. I think a lot of us, especially in the South End, and yourself when we're at doors, speeding is an issue, and specifically how we've over-designed our roads in the last 15, 20 years. We're designing roads that are almost mini highways. If anybody follows the world of urban planning, the word is called almost a strode, where it's not a street, it's a road. It's basically like a mini highway, and it's not safe for pedestrians. It's not safe it doesn't encourage walkability. And then we're surprised later when we're spending thousands of dollars to bring out the curbs, to put planters, to do speed bumps. So especially for my fellow councillors with lots of annexed land, so that's Councillor Harvey and Councillor Hamilton, myself, this is good for the existing area, but on future roads, we're gonna start thinning them so we don't have to do this.
Thank you, Councillor Morales. Are there any other questions or comments on this matter? Seeing none, I'm certainly supportive of this. It's something I heard at every door on every collector in the city of Barrie. And I'm not going to be part of how that fund is spent, but I would encourage it to be really looked at in your wards to find what those high need places are. And Councillor Hamilton, thank you for bringing this forward and for bringing this conversation both over the last couple of weeks forward, but certainly tonight as well. With that being said, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? It carries. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. My next amendment is in relation to the downtown permanent market to add the following under paragraph 14. to refer all capital projects in relation to the downtown permanent market to the Finance and Responsible Governance Committee, and I can speak to that.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. It's on the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Obviously, we all received a memo in regards to the last RFQ in relation to the market, which unfortunately nobody bid on. And then there's a lot of other working pieces that are in this particular budget that are in relation to the market. And I think really it's onerous on us to have a further discussion to see our next steps, especially since the curveball kind of got thrown in that nobody has submitted for the initial RFQ to move this project forward. But I think it's key for anybody that is watching to ensure that the market is definitely high on our priority. It's just a matter of revisiting this to see what our next appropriate steps are to make this come to life.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Are there any other comments or questions? Oh, with referral, we cannot comment or question. So we will now call the vote because that's the only thing that remains. All those in favor on my right? And my left, it passes. So that is now being referred to the Finance and Responsible Governance Committee. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. The next motion here is to update to an additional 1% DERF motion. The paragraph 2 be amended to delete the reference to the 1% dedicated infrastructure renewal fund, and the following be added as paragraph 3, with the remaining paragraphs be renumbered accordingly. And that staff in the finance department be directed to develop a separate reserve to the dedicated infrastructure renewal fund, and that contributions to the DERF be increased to 2% for 2023 through to 2025, and that 50% of the DERF collected be for stormwater capital infrastructure. And I can speak to that as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Your motion's amendments on the floor.
Thank you. I think one of the things I learned quickly going through the budget binders that I was almost shocked to find out is that Barrie owns nearly $6 billion worth of infrastructure. And I think what we've heard over and over again from residents, or certainly I've heard over and over again from residents, is that we need to take care of what already exists. So our roads, those potholes we all hear about, our sidewalks, the parks, maintaining our facilities. Separating the DERF into a distinct and separate reserve will ensure that we're using taxpayer dollars where they want it spent to replace and repair existing infrastructure. I had a chance to look at the budget allocator tour online as well, where we received feedback from residents in terms of where they would like to see City Council prioritize their tax dollars, and infrastructure was the #1 priority identified. The amendment also puts forward the notion to increase the DERF to 2%. And this is to keep more of our infrastructure well maintained and to avoid any costly repairs while reducing the city's debt substantially as well. And just to note that in 2021, the DERF was decreased to 0.25 of the recommended 1%. In 2022, it was decreased to 0.75 from the previous recommended 1%. And I think at that time, probably those reductions made sense given COVID. But what it's resulted is where we are today with some overaging infrastructure and a significant backlog in renewals. So I do think this is on the table right now for City to discuss and have dialogue about, because by not investing in our infrastructure, it's going to directly impact our service levels. So that's why the proposed 2% is on the table.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Are there any questions or comment regarding the Councillor Kungl?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to staff, I was wondering if, well, for me and for those watching this evening, if we could translate a bit of the motion into financials. So the way it's reading, I'm seeing is that 2% for the next 3 years. Mr. Miller, what would that translate to around income coming into that fund? So we could appreciate what 50% would be tied to being directed to stormwater.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall. So 1% is equal to $3 million. So this adds another 1% to the existing proposed DERF of 1%. So it'd be another $3 million. So in total, there's $6 million would be going into capital reserves, and as the motions read, 50% of that would be used to allocate towards stormwater.
So I was assuming that was over the 3 years, 6 million a year. So 18 million, half of that going to stormwater infrastructure,
So
around 50%.
So yeah, it'd be $18 million over the next 3 years, and
Yeah.
half of that,
Yeah.
9 million would be
9
would
million,
be
the
stormwater.
50%.
I would
Yeah.
just add that we still use the tax capital reserve to also fund some stormwater works, as well as we continue to build up funds for that program.
Okay. And maybe in follow-up, I'm seeing that the reference is to capital infrastructure. In the proposed stormwater levy we discussed last night, my understanding was that 10.5 million was about 3 million tied to operations, about 7.5 million tied to infrastructure. Is there any gap in the framing of this where operations is not covered, or I'm assuming that's still coming out of our operating as is today?
Through you, Mayor Nettle, to Councillor Kungal. So there was motions passed last night that did put back the 2 million on that was onto the tax levy that was funding operations. So there was a motion that did deal with that part of it last night. I believe the intent is for the additional 1% to address the other $7 million. That was the capital component.
And I'm assuming any pressure, well, I know there'll be pressures, but with this just being framed to infrastructure, is there anything that we should be considering around operational costs?
Craig, I'll actually jump in if that's okay. So in the motion that you see before you, it's asking for, as you said, 1% per year, which will essentially net out the 10 million, just under the 10 million that was talked about in the stormwater fund last evening.
Mhm.
Instead of it all coming in 1 year, it's coming over 3 years. A component of that will be operations, and the balance will be capital. So it'll all be encompassed in that, but it allows a 3-year ramp up to that same number essentially.
Thank you. I appreciate the ramp up, but I was just wanting to make sure that there was nothing missing, because I know we talked about infrastructure and operations being two unique pieces of that funding pie. I'm not seeing operations formally enclosed in this. So I'm wondering what's assumed, or if it
you look at
is.
the next motion that we're about to take on, it covers that off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is just purely infrastructure.
This part of it's just purely in infrastructure, and then there's one, I think, coming from Councillor Harvey with regards to the operations.
So my final question then back to you, Mr. Miller. So knowing that with respects to, I guess, conversations to come, whether it's now or maybe I'll hold the question as long as we're able to ask questions of staff this evening before we close, which is appreciating an overall gap between what the stormwater levy was aiming to accomplish versus what we are attempting, I think, to put back in part. And if there's going to be a gap at the end that we need to appreciate around how else are we going to come back to address this infrastructure cost gap?
So I think that's a great point. I think we should get through the next two motions if that's okay, and then we can talk about what's actually in the budget. I would offer this as well. Okay, so last night there was 4% cut from the stormwater fund. There's a presentation here, a proposal to add 1% in. Members of council can change that to a much higher rate if they decide to, right? Because it'll account for it then. I mean, if there's the want to cover the missing stormwater operations plus the capital funding of 11.78 million, Mr. Miller can definitely give us the number that would allow that to happen through the DERF. And you could put that on the floor.
Okay, I'll wait to see what comes out of the next two
Sure.
motions. But I would be, at least before the evening's over, interested to know if there is a gap, what that is, if we're leaving here today
Certainly.
with that gap.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nettle. I'll be supporting it, and I'll just offer an interesting comment as to why I think what Councillor Hamilton said is dead on. It's important to separate between the north end and the south end, specifically with renewal funds. Mayor Nettle, we want to make sure it goes to the right place. And this actually, by separating it, by making it its own separate fund, it allows us to create a really great KPI that all the committees will make sure, because when you assign the money to this, we'll be able to measure more. Is it going to the right projects, to the right road renewal for the whole city, but particularly for my colleagues in the north? And then I think everybody will be better for it, including residents, because we get to in a much easier way show them what's being fixed specifically by earmarking, if you will, the money.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. Are there any other questions or comments around the table? Okay, any other amendments to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor? It carries. Councillor Harvey, I believe you have another amendment here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. That the following be added to paragraph 3, that to help offset inflationary pressures in 2023, that $1.9 million from the reinvestment reserve and $1.1 million from the tax rate stabilization reserve be used as a one-time fund, city tax funded operations.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. It's on the floor. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. It essentially what it's doing is offsetting the previous motion. Obviously, we're in extremely difficult times. We're at record high inflations in most of our lifetimes. And the reality of it is most people in this city cannot afford that additional 1% being put onto the levy for this year. So as a one-time offer, this creates no impact to that 1%. However, because we all know the impact that the DERF has and the need when it comes to fixing our roads, and obviously we had quite a discussion about the stormwater piece of it last night, this still allows that to occur. However, now it's being funded from these reserves. So that way it'll have no impact to the tax levy moving forward for this year anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Are there any other questions or comments around the table? Seeing none, those in favor? It carries. I believe there's one more motion. Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. This is a motion to staff that staff issue a request for proposal for a company for the purpose of carbon credit generation and monetization. That the request for proposal include the following parameters: that the successful bidder work with the city to generate, develop, and sell carbon credits with focus on maximizing revenues. All bids must require $0 investment for the city. That there be no cost to the taxpayers to operate the program. All data must be managed on the greenest possible blockchain platform to ensure transparency and accountability. And that staff report back to Finance and Responsible Governance Committee via memorandum in June 2023, advising of the outcome of the request for proposal. And I can speak to that.
The amendment is on the floor, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. So going through the binder, and there's a section in it with the efficiencies of the great work our staff are doing. And one really stuck out to me with the, and I could be wrong on the number, and Mr. Ferrari may be able to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 38 tons of carbon that we had saved with the electric Zamboni. I think it was somewhere in around that, and if I'm right.
Your worship and members of council, I've just deferred to Miss Oakley, who's going to see if she can find that information when it was purchased. So if you could bear with us for a few seconds.
It's in the efficiency of the binder. Anyways, while you're looking for it, it's the number really doesn't matter. What we're actually doing the work, and no pun intended, but it's literally just going up in smoke. So I think this is an opportunity, and there's companies out there that they can monetize it, measure it, and then they sell it to the open market. So the great work Transit's doing with electric buses, recreation of some of the stuff we're doing to reduce the carbon footprints, our net zero builds. These are things, and by starting it early, there's investment banks that will invest in our city to maximize the stuff we do, which, you know, we're talking last night in regards to funding of stormwater. This could fund programs like that with great initiatives that the city and staff are already doing. But by putting a price tag and being able to sell it to the open market. So I'm looking for support to kind of think out of the box and trying to find a revenue source to help with some of our crumbling infrastructure and gapping.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Are there any questions or comments? Councilor Ritma?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly will support that recommendation that the deputy mayor has made. I think one of the real advantages of it is not only does it monetize some of the things that we are actually doing, but it also creates an incentive for us to do more. So I think that it's a win all around, and I think we should pursue it. Hopefully, we can actually monetize it.
Thank you, Councilor Ritma. Are there any other, Councilor Morales?
Thank you, Mayor Nettle. I like the motion. I just have one concern with the second bullet point, that all bids must require $0 initial investment from the city. I presume that is that's in place, so the successful bidder doesn't come to us and say, great, I'll get you 1 million carbons. You just have to spend $50 million on this technology or this retrofit. So I understand that it's a stop a major capital investment that might be unproven technology, might be a long time to get the money back, and it makes us go into debentures, but it's the word $0 initial investment. What if they have a really effective one that's just, instead of buying a $30,000 car, you just buy a $35,000 EV? Technically, that is an increase, not a zero sum, and it prevents us from doing that. So I was wondering, Deputy Mayor Thompson, if there's some wiggle room in that to prevent those very close cases from being off the table.
Can I confirm, just on the question? I think if I'm looking at the motion, it's talking about the zero investment for the actual process. You're speaking right there about an investment in an actual item that will reduce our carbon footprint. So I believe that everything we do to reduce our carbon footprint has a cost one way or another, or we would definitely have done it already. So this is in the actual process, if there is one that is followed through on. I'm going to speak to this afterwards, but not on the actual changes to find the credits. Okay.
Thank you for the clarification. So it's kind of like setting up the process. So the filing cabinet, is it expected that it should be at zero cost? I don't know this industry, by the way. So I think.
So from all the research I've done, it's like anything. There's, you know, some that will charge a lot of money, and then the majority of them, there is a cost to them, but it's only once they start selling it to the open market. So they establish the plan, they monitor it, they run it, and that's why I wanted the blockchain. So it can be audited, it can be monitored, and it's for transparency.
Okay, thanks so much.
And just so it was 38 tons. So you take that just from the Zambonis. So it's stuff we're already doing, and it'd be nice because have a revenue source, and we'll celebrate all the good work staff does with revenues.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Question to the mover of this. Obviously, I'm very supportive of it because any new revenue stream that we can create is always a good thing. I know, especially down in Toronto, you always hear Mayor Tory talking about the struggles that they have in looking for new streams and talking about putting taxes on parking spots. But this is obviously very different, and especially if we're generating green credits that are not being used, we may as well make some economical use of them. I'm just kind of curious, and again, I'm just looking at what another city has done. If you look at the city of New Westminster, when they adopted this, they were able to go back 7 years all the way to 2013 to accumulate their credits, which amounted to a sale of $26 million. Do we have any idea of what we would be able to do? It sounds good. I just wasn't sure if Deputy Mayor Thompson had been able to dive into it that deeply to see how far we're able to go back for the accumulation of credits.
Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall. I think there's something very similar to the tax credit, like, so you can go back, like, you know, your personal 3, business 7. I think there is going back, but I was not 100% sure how far they could go back. So I would imagine it'd be very similar.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? So I just, I want to say thank you to Deputy Mayor Thompson, who pestered me on making sure this got on the agenda. And this is something that I actually ran on in the election, and certainly the letter we had, I met with that company, and I don't know if they're the right ones at the end, but what I do know is that this appears to be something that others are able to make work in other provinces. Our regulatory framework's different here. I don't know where it ends up going with the provincial government, because they will have a heavy hand in whether this is established as a full market, or it's something that needs to be dealt with in markets outside of Ontario. And so I think there's a lot of question marks on how good is this or isn't it in comparison with BC and other places. So I think that's a wait and see. We should be at least finding ways to document and generate the credits, and over time, whether it's in the next month, 6 months, 6 years, making sure that we are in this play, because quite frankly, I think it's going to, I believe it is the kind of monetary answer to being able to fund some of our work we're doing on climate change. And, you know, anytime that we can align revenues with expenses, it makes it easier for all of us to make a decision around the table. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I have a background in finance. I've spent a lot of time on the budget, and how many times was I working through the budget going, okay, well, why does that dollar pay for that thing? And I think potentially we have an opportunity here to go, let's see if we can generate those dollars to match those investments in terms of tackling climate change. That's stormwater we talked about last night, but it's a whole bunch of other things that we could potentially deal with. So I'm certainly supportive of it, and would thank General Committee for support of this motion, because I think it will help us over the years to come. Since I'm the chair of the meeting, I guess I call the vote now. All those in favor? Councillor Kungl, you wanted to go into a little bit more in-depth conversation. I think probably also a longer term conversation about the cost of infrastructure, the stormwater, all of those items. If there's no other amendments, and I don't see any other amendments in front of me, why don't we go into that conversation now?
Sure, through you, Mayor Nuttall, maybe it's, I'll direct it to staff then. So seeing that while there was a motion tied to operations for the stormwater, it is one time. And while, we talk a bit about what the DERF increased for the additional percent, and then the $3 million, I think, out of the operations motion that was passed, kind of sum up to what we were talking about last night with stormwater. We were also looking at what's projected to come with the growth and some of the information staff brought forward. So it would be good to understand where best to continue to have that conversation. So 2 pieces. we're pulling a lot from reserves. Would love to look at the health and wellness of our reserves and the status of, well, the impact of decisions we're making tonight around awareness of what that's done and the strategy forward. But then also, while we looked at making decisions to kind of recover the costs that we were attributing to stormwater and the levy, I'd like to know what the gap is around what those, what funds those two motions will support tied to stormwater, but also then the gap, especially with the one-time dollars not covering out years as the other motion did. And then as we're forecasting out around asset management and stormwater infrastructure and operations, what do we actually need long-term that this does not support?
So can I ask you just a question on your questions? Is this something maybe we could, I know that Councillor Hamilton, name of your committee that you are the chair of is infrastructure investment and community investment. Thank you. They were going through the capital plan and some of these funding items. You also sit on the finance and responsible government committee. And I love where that's going because I think that this isn't a one night thing. This is a through the year thing. We need to be able to plan out what all the puts and takes are for the city in terms of where we're investing, how we're investing, what we're falling behind on, because our budget is very clear. There's $76 million worth of infrastructure demand. There's $40 million worth of infrastructure money coming in. And that's only changing through all of the decisions tonight and in the future. So would you like to have something in the budget that refers some items for presentations at the committees? I know that one's already started in terms of the infrastructure.
So in comment to only if necessary. So I would really, it's more of a look to staff to see about how best and when best to bring the impact of our decisions through budget back, be it to finance and then correspondingly to infrastructure around how we're going to pay for infrastructure growth and other capital pieces, but also then making sure that finance has a clear point of view around health of reserves and or the gap we need to appreciate over time for stormwater.
And Mr. Miller, for sure, that's for you to answer. Could you also in that please talk about the DERF and the compounding of it so that it kind of makes sense where the streamline is compared with the stormwater?
Through you, Mayor Nettle, what I was going to point out is if you remember last night, there was a motion passed that we're shifting funding from the proposed stormwater capital program. There's about $17 million that this budget was approved. We're shifting that onto the tax capital report reserve, but there's a motion in there that staff are to come back before the end of March to look at taking some pressure off that tax capital in the short term, moving or deferring projects. So that's something that staff will be working on. And to the fact of the DERF is the benefit of the DERF is over time because it's right now 2% is $6 million for this year. Then that $6 million that you approved this year is in next year's budget. And if you do another 2%, then you're up to 12 million, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the strategy that the city needs to keep moving on to fund overall capital needs. But in the short term, we will be coming back with some suggested amendments to before the end of March on the capital plan.
Great, thank you.
And will that be to the finance committee that you'll be taking those recommendations?
Certainly we can go there. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Are there any other? Yes, Councillor.
Just following up on that discussion, we've taken, money out of our reserves and moved it around. And I wonder if we couldn't get a chart that shows all the reserve funds that we have and what's in them and what's projected for the next couple of years, say 5 years, so that we get a sense of what our reserves are like. And I realize that there are some reserves that are like locked in and committed, DCs for one, but I'd like to get an overall picture of that and then kind of know which ones are available to us and which ones aren't.
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Nettle. So I do remind you that in the binder, we do project out the continuity reserves. So when we go through the exercise of coming back before the end of March to make some adjustments, we can certainly then recalibrate and have a discussion of finance and corporate services of what the renewed forecast looks like. As you also know, we are bringing forward a development charge bylaws study in the spring, so we're getting a good understanding of what the DCs are going to look like. So there'll be an opportunity this spring to have a really, I would say, robust conversation around reserves and financial health.
Any other questions or comments? I have a few comments that I'd like to end with on the capital plan. And I think that it's important to recognize after all of the amendments are made, after we close out the books for 2022, we're going to end up somewhere within, I'm guessing, $1 million of where we were projected, except for the $7 million for the stormwater fund capital works that was added in. So generally the reserves are the same except for that. Okay. Where council's gone so far in the budget is to plan out the next 2 years. Instead of a 1-year ramp up to $10 million, it's a 3-year ramp up to $10 million. That's the major difference. Those revenues are still going to be sought in future years, right? This is a plan that says 1% per year. This year it's 3,078,000 to 3,080,000. Next year it'll be, something about the same, or maybe even just a little bit higher. But that's the general plan that the council or general committee has approved through amendments to this plan. There is for me a deeper issue that we are facing because of Bill 23, Bill 109. In the operating budget on 109, CAO Prowse, I think there was about a request of $400,000 to help with the planning department. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor Nettle. 460,000, I think, on the tax levy.
And we approved how much of that?
I think it was cut in half. I don't have the exact number.
So, and you think you said 460, so call it $250,000 right off the top. What has happened is we've had to reduce service elsewhere to pay for that $250,000 to be able to meet the new requirements in Bill 109. That's just one of 2 bills so far that we're dealing with in terms of regulatory changes. Then there's Bill 23. Bill 23, we know, cuts our revenue. And I say our revenue, it's developers' revenue that they pay to us, but the result of the cuts are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 million was the last calculation that I had seen. Is that correct, CAO Prowse?
I believe we projected approximately $90 million over the next 10 years, Mayor. No.
90 million over the next 10 years. Thank you. So we have some serious issues ahead of us. And they're not going to be solved in a night, and they're not going to be solved in a year, quite frankly. They're going to be solved over a sustained period of time with a plan that everyone buys into. And I think that what's happened over the past number of years, where there's been reductions to the dedicated infrastructure renewal fund, has bitten. And we need to recognize that. And we need to make the necessary changes. I don't know how everyone else campaigned around this table. My commitment was to hold city operations and to invest in infrastructure. That's what I committed to. I think that over time, that'll be completed. It's not completed through this budget tonight, and I wouldn't dare say that to be the case. But it is, I think, where we need to focus as a city going forward for so many reasons. One is obviously the effects of climate change, stormwater, all the things we're seeing. One of them is it creates jobs when we invest in infrastructure locally. We're in a down environment. Another one is it builds the city of the future. When people move into our community, into new developments, they take advantage of the current infrastructure. But the reality is, when we're collecting those dollars over the past 5 to 10 years, the reality is that they haven't just been going to pay for fixing up the current city. That's just reality. And I don't want to get into the past, so I'm not going to get into the past, but I am going to talk about the future. when we go into the dedicated infrastructure reserve, we need to make sure that it is actually taking care of the people who are paying for it. And I think that that's a conversation we need to have more in depth over the next 12 months, because that is the expectation that previous councils that approved these items. I was on one with then Councillor Prowse that started the item into motion. And that was our request back then. Was then approved in the 14 to 18 council. I can't remember what year. The expectation was we collect money, it fixes roads. We collect money, it deals with stormwater. We collect money, it deals with all of the sidewalks issues we have, or crumbling buildings like the Dorian Parker Center. And so when we don't feel like we have enough money to be able to fix the items that are in the current city, we need to look ourselves in the mirror, not anyone else. We need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, how are we spending that money? And that's not going to get fixed in the 90 days since the election, and it won't get fixed in the next 90 days, because it'll be every single decision on spending we make over the next 4 years will determine how that happens. And so I really do believe that we're on the right track here, that we've set a very good direction, but I also believe that it's going to take a lot of discipline to make sure that the dollars collected are going to the right places. With all of that said, are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I did have a couple that wasn't specific to amendments on the capital, but I did want to do a check-in. So on the actual items that we addressed last evening, 1A, I believe, talked a bit about $35,000 that was underutilized for the market coming over and being held to support next phase of kind of business management or business proposals. With the motion on the deferral tied to the capital piece of the market in whole, which we couldn't discuss, I wanted just to clarify that I'm assuming that will continue. $35,000 will actually get tucked in to what we're pausing, and should it be needed, should it be resurrected to continue, that $35,000 would still then be built into that piece, that we haven't compromised that money in any way.
Madam Clerk, is this one of the amendments from last evening?
This evening, it's about the impact of the amendment this evening. So on the capital side, Councillor Harvey identified pausing on all capital projects related to the market. We had a motion last night tucked into the whole budget piece that actually talks about $35,000 underspent last year coming over, that's tied to the market specifically and the business planning development. So I just want to check in about how that would or would not be impacted.
Sorry, CAO Prowse, could you?
I think Mr. Miller has the answer, Mayor Nuttall.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall. So Councillor Kungle is referring to an item in the report that staff had brought forward to carry forward funds that weren't spent in 2022 into 2023. And that was for economic development. So my understanding is that that would also be paused as part of the motion tonight, that money wouldn't be used. If I'm saying it wrong, Stephanie Slichter is online if needed. But I think that's the correct response.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure we didn't lose what was tied to operations versus capital, and that money was still tracking to be knitted to the market should it move forward in the future. So thank you for that. My next question, and this is coming in from residents through the course of the conversation last night, and I think I'll direct it to Mr. Arrhenius Sundaram. When we talk a bit about the capital projects and several did touch parking lots and pavement surfaces and whatnot, the questions are coming in about, is our approach going to be around permeable surfaces, knowing that even stormwater and runoff and all those aspects are a big part of the conversation around climate action. So I didn't know if you could speak to if there's a particular environmental approach that we are taking as a city when we look at pavement or paving surfaces.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle. I think on every project, we do look at environmental approaches where they make sense. On our road projects, for example, we do look at what we call LIDs, low impact developments. If there is merit, then we would certainly implement those. And if you want more details, there may be others in the audience that could maybe provide more details, but definitely it's these types of features, low impact developments to manage the stormwater and the runoff in a more environmentally friendly sense. We do look at those types of options where they make sense, both economically and technically.
Thank you. And then last question through you, Mayor Nuttall. To staff, I'll assume to perhaps start with CEO Prouse and then to let you refer as appropriate. So again, with that deferral motion on the market, we weren't able to ask questions. So I am looking for a point of clarification. The reference in the motion was plural around capital projects related to the market precinct. I was wondering if I could get clarity around what exactly, if staff are aware at this time, is being paused in our capital plan as a result of that deferral motion.
CEO Prouse.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Ballin may have some additional comments. I think what I would say to Councillor Kungl is that based on the lack of interest from consultants as it related to the vision for the market, there really isn't a clear next step. So council has asked to reconsider what that course is. So that brief pause, I think, actually impacts almost nothing. The money has been set aside. There isn't any imminent work that was going to go in advance of that. Council/committee will have an opportunity to have discussions, formulate a plan, same plan, different plan. You'll have time to give staff a same direction or a new direction, and we will be able to go back and take the next step. So I would say in the interim, really nothing is lost. You're just taking a very short pause.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think, and I'm assuming when you say that too, that although there was an identified location of interest, that should there be any other plans for that space that would come back to council as a conversation, or everything's on the table when we talk a bit about development, regardless of space, knowing that that particular market is paused. So is there any other impact from a location where we were talking about the development that might not be protected?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungl. No, I don't believe that there's anything that sort of is outside the scope, Councillor Kungl. You know, there was a vision for what was possible, I think is probably the way I would present it. And council's direction previously had been to go explore what is possible. We haven't landed on somebody who can sort of show us that map. So we are really still at frankly, the beginning stages of that visualization of what the market could be. I think the letter from the farmers market will require that council give some consideration to that. I think the fact that we weren't able to get a consultant to take up a very large vision of the area will require council to reconsider that. I don't believe it's going to limit or hinder council's discretion around any of those matters.
Thank you. And I think that helps around managing expectations, or what does this mean as a next step for the public? I appreciate that.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Yeah, just to touch on that, I think what might have caused some of the confusion was the draft that was distributed to everybody was changed at the witching hour with some quick conversations with one of my colleagues around the table. So that's why it was not paused, and that it was referred back to committee opposed to a deferral also. So like, I mean, there really hasn't been any changes. It's just now it'll give us that time to take a step back, allow staff to revisit it too, and provide us some guidance, and for us to have a discussion as to where we go from here, because we're kind of in a bad spot where nobody wanted to move forward with the project that was put out for RFP. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I will call the vote on EMT 001-23, the 2023 business plan and budget as amended. All those in favor? It carries. I will not do what I did last night and try to end the meeting prematurely. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I'm catching you on the hot seat or not, but if Mr. Millar and his team can provide us with an update as to where we are, at least on the city side of things, minus our service partners.
Mr. Miller, I think that Councillor Harvey just started the inquiry portion of our evening.
Through you, Mayor Nettle, to Councillor Harvey. So the city's operations is still at 0%. And then plus the that effect of 1%, the 1% on the DERF. So it's at 1% right now, excluding partners.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Miller, did we not just add an additional 1%?
Sorry, you do have a 2% DERF overall,
Thank
sorry,
you.
but
Yes.
there was some offsetting revenues in the overall operating budget that we brought in from reserves. So the
Okay.
overall effect is, the net effect is 1%. You do have a line item that has a 2% DERF, but overall it's a 1% increase. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. That was my misunderstanding. Thank you. Are there any other inquiries around the table? Seeing none, we'll go to announcements. Are there any announcements? Councillor Hamilton?
Just want to announce that this Saturday, February 11th, has been proclaimed Women's Hockey Day in Barrie. The event's going to showcase stars from the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, including Barrie's own Jessie Eldridge. The puck will drop at 1 p.m. at the Sadlon Arena, and I will be there if anybody wants to join me.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Any other announcements around the table this evening? Seeing.
I have one, sorry.
Okay.
I'm
See, I
trying,
I look over there
Yeah.
first, Councillor.
I'm gonna
Ready
do
for
this
the
because
announcement.
I want to get a picture of those of us later, but I did want to say, show the love. Don't forget about the Show the Love campaign. This is a letter writing or social media campaign using the hashtag Show the Love. It's around reaching out to individuals living and working in retirement homes and long-term care homes. If you're not in Barrie, there's nothing stopping you from doing this in your community. But this has been started through partnership with Barrie Police, the North Simcoe Muskoka Specialized Geriatric Services, Catholic Family Services, and others. And so we've seen a huge ripple around this campaign. So I want to thank members of council who actually took the time and participated in the campaign. And I will be dropping this off at Barrie Police Headquarters tomorrow. So thank you to council and wishing everyone a nice Valentine's Day, but every day, hopefully, there's ways in which we're showing acts of kindness.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing that back to General Committee and Council on a number of occasions and raising awareness. It's a really nice campaign. Any other announcements before we adjourn our meeting? Seeing none, then this completes our General Committee meeting for this evening and committee is adjourned.